I once believed my career was everything. My dedication, my sacrifices, my 14-hour days. They all meant something. Until that morning in the glass conference room, when they stripped away my authority with surgical precision, demoted, humiliated, discarded like yesterday's financial reports. They thought they'd broken me, those smug faces around that polished table. They couldn't have been more wrong. That wasn't my ending. It was the spark that ignited something far more dangerous. Within 18 months, I'd be sitting in the CEO chair of a $300 million empire, while they'd be clearing out their desks. My name is Amanda Carter. And at 34, I thought I had corporate America figured out. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other at Harbor and Vale Industries' Chicago headquarters. The 42nd floor hummed with its usual rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the Keurig machines hissing in every break room. I arrived at 7:15 a.m., as always, my heels, clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd earned her place. The email had come at 7:47 a.m., mandatory meeting, conference room A, 8 a.m. sharp. No subject line, no context. Just Richard Holloway's name at the bottom. Our interim vice president who'd been prowling the halls like a hungry wolf since our CEO's sudden retirement 2 months ago. Conference room A was our execution chamber, all glass walls and white LED panels that made everyone look slightly corpse-like. I entered to find them already assembled. Richard at the head of the table, his Yale class ring catching the light as he drummed his fingers. James Brennan from legal, avoiding eye contact. Marcus Webb from HR, shuffling papers like they held nuclear codes. 3 more senior managers, all men, all wearing the same expression, somewhere between pity and satisfaction. "Amanda, please sit," Richard said, gesturing to the lone empty chair at the far end. The walk felt endless. 20 feet might as well have been 20 miles. "We need to discuss your position," he began, his voice carrying that false concern executives perfect in business school. "The board has been reviewing our organizational structure, and we've identified some redundancies. Redundancies. The corporate euphemism that preceded every professional assassination. Your performance has been adequate," he continued, and I felt the knife slide in with that single word. Adequate. 3 years of exceeding targets, launching 2 divisions that generated $40 million in revenue, working through pneumonia last winter to close the Singapore deal. Adequate. However, we're restructuring the Strategic Development Division. We're offering you a transition to Senior Analyst in Operations. Same benefits package, adjusted compensation, of course. Adjusted compensation. From Director to Senior Analyst, 3 rungs down the ladder I'd spent a decade climbing. The salary cut would be at least 40%. But it was the humiliation that burned. Senior Analyst was what they called fresh MBAs who still didn't know how to read a P&L statement properly. "This is effective immediately," Marcus added, sliding a folder across the table's Arctic surface. "Your new supervisor will be Kevin Chen from—" "Kevin started 8 months ago," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. "He was my intern last summer." "Kevin has shown remarkable potential," Richard said, his lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We believe this arrangement will optimize our resource allocation." The room fell silent. They were waiting for me to break, to cry, to beg, to rage. That's what they wanted. These men who'd decided my fate in some private meeting I'd never been invited to. I could see it in their eyes, especially Richard's. He wanted the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I picked up the folder, feeling its weight. Inside would be the new contract, the NDA, the carefully worded threats about what would happen if I didn't go quietly. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in that harsh, unforgiving brightness that made the room feel like an operating theater. "I'll need time to review this," I said, standing. My legs felt disconnected from my body, but I forced them to work. "Of course," Richard said, already turning his attention to his phone. "HR will need your decision by end of day. Your new desk is on 37. Kevin will brief you on your assignments tomorrow morning." 37. The floor where dreams went to die. The floor for people the company wanted to forget existed. I walked out of conference room A with my spine straight, heels still clicking with manufactured authority. But inside, something had shattered. Not broken, shattered. Into pieces so fine I could feel them cutting me with every breath. The hallway stretched before me, and suddenly every face I passed seemed to know. The whispers had probably started before I'd even sat down in that room. Corporate gossip traveled at the speed of light in this tower. By the time I reached my office, former office, my assistant Kelly was already packing my things into boxes, her face a mask of professional sympathy. The nameplate had already been removed from my door. Amanda Carter, Director of Strategic Development, had ceased to exist at 8:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. But standing there, watching my professional life get folded into cardboard boxes, something else was being born. Something Richard Holloway and his pack of gray-suited jackals couldn't possibly imagine. They thought they'd killed me professionally. They had no idea they'd just created something far more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The 37th floor was corporate purgatory. Flickering fluorescent lights, coffee-stained carpet that hadn't been replaced since 2015, and the persistent smell of microwave fish from the break room. My new desk sat in the middle of an open floor plan. No walls, no privacy, just rows of identical workstations filled with the professionally deceased. 3 weeks had passed since my demotion, and I'd learned what true invisibility felt like. Former colleagues who used to seek my input now walked past without acknowledgement. Email chains I'd once led suddenly didn't include me. The Singapore deal I'd spent 2 years orchestrating was being presented at the quarterly review next week, with Richard's name as lead architect. Morning, Amanda. Kevin Marsh, my 25-year-old supervisor, chirped as he dropped another stack of data entry assignments on my desk. The same kid who couldn't figure out Excel macros 9 months ago. Need these reconciled by lunch. The real strategic team has a presentation this afternoon. The real strategic team. Every word was calculated to cut. I nodded, opening the first spreadsheet, mind-numbing work. The kind they gave to interns or people they were trying to force out, but I did it meticulously, because that's who I was, who I'd always been. Even in hell, I delivered excellence. Heard you used to run strategic development, Dennis from accounting said during another gray lunch in the break room. Must be tough, taking orders from Marsh. It's fine. I lied, stabbing at my sad desk salad. Richard's really cleaning house up there, he continued, lowering his voice. You're the third director he's pushed out. Jennifer from marketing lasted 2 weeks in her transition role before she quit. Exactly what he wanted. No severance that way. The pattern suddenly crystallized. This wasn't about redundancy or optimization. This was Richard Holloway systematically eliminating anyone who might challenge his power grab. And I'd been naive enough to think hard work and results mattered. That night, I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, laptop open, wine glass empty, staring at LinkedIn messages from recruiters. Saw your profile update, they all began. Corporate vultures circling what they assumed was fresh career roadkill. But leaving meant Richard won. Leaving meant they successfully erased me. I opened another bottle of wine and started digging. Harbor and Vale's internal systems were still accessible from my laptop. IT hadn't bothered to revoke my higher-level permissions. Sloppy? Or maybe they just assumed I was too broken to matter. I started pulling reports, financial documents, meeting minutes. Legal? Probably not. But neither was constructive dismissal disguised as restructuring. The more I dug, the more I understood. Richard wasn't just power-hungry. He was building something. The directors he'd pushed out weren't random. We all had one thing in common. We'd opposed the Metalworks acquisition he'd been pushing. A $60 million deal that made no strategic sense unless you were getting kickbacks. My phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez, former director of marketing, the one Jennifer had replaced before being pushed out herself. Heard what happened to you. Coffee tomorrow. As we met at a cafe in the Loop, far from Harbor and Vale's sphere. He did the same thing to me 6 months ago, Sarah said, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her cappuccino. The humiliation was surgical, designed to make me quit. Did you? After 3 weeks of being treated like an intern by a 23-year-old? Yes. Her laugh was bitter. Lost my unvested stock options, exactly what Richard wanted. How many others? At least 5 that I know of. All directors or VPs who ask too many questions about his deals. She leaned forward. Amanda, he's got the board completely snowed. Promises them cost-cutting and efficiency while he builds his own empire. That afternoon, back at my desk on 37, I watched Kevin present my Singapore strategies to a room full of executives on the video conference screen. My work, my relationships, my innovations, all with his name attached. Richard sat at the head of the table, nodding approvingly at his puppet. The anger that had been simmering for weeks finally crystallized into something harder, colder. They'd made a tactical error. They'd left me alive professionally, assuming humiliation would drive me out. They'd left me with access, assuming I was too broken to use it. They'd left me with time, assuming I'd spend it feeling sorry for myself. How's the data entry going? Kevin asked, stopping by my desk after his triumphant presentation. Almost done, I replied, not looking up from my screen. Good. Richard wants you to audit the Q3 expense reports next. The whole quarter. Should keep you busy for a few weeks. Expense reports. The perfect punishment, tedious, mind-numbing, soul-crushing work. But also access to every credit card transaction, every client dinner, every business trip. Richard had just handed me the keys to his kingdom, disguised as a punishment. I'll get right on it, I said, allowing a small smile. That night, I created a new encrypted folder on my personal drive. I named it Reconciliation. Inside, I started building a database. Every questionable expense, every pattern, every thread that connected Richard Holloway to something darker than simple corporate ambition. The man who'd tried to bury me professionally had just given me the shovel I needed to dig his grave. He simply didn't know it yet. The 37th floor was purgatory. But purgatory, I realized, was the perfect place to plan a resurrection and a reckoning. 6 weeks into my exile, the patterns in the expense reports had become undeniable. Richard Holloway wasn't just corrupt. He was systematically bleeding Harbor and Vale dry. The Metalworks acquisition was the tip of the iceberg. Every quarter showed the same signs: inflated vendor contracts, suspicious consulting fees, business trips that coincided with property purchases in the Caymans. I worked late every night, long after the 37th floor emptied out. My official task was data entry, but my real work happened in the shadows of spreadsheets and buried in forensic accounting that my MBA from Wharton had prepared me for, even if Richard assumed I'd forgotten how to use it. The breakthrough came on a Thursday at 11:47 p.m. Constellation Consulting, LLC, a firm that had received $3.2 million in fees over the past 18 months for strategic advisory services. The company was registered in Delaware, naturally, but its board of directors was fascinating. Richard's brother-in-law, his former business partner from a failed venture in 2019. And most interesting, Marcus Webb, our current head of HR, the same man who'd sat in that glass room as they demoted me. They weren't just corrupt, they were a network. I cross-referenced every Constellation invoice with internal projects. Not a single deliverable, not one report. $3 million for absolutely nothing except a paper trail that led directly back to Richard's inner circle. My phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez. Still at the office, saw your location on LinkedIn. I'd forgotten to turn that off. Sloppy. But Sarah was an ally, or at least enemy of my enemy territory. Working late. You? Can we talk? Not text. Talk. We met in the parking garage. Sarah's BMW idled next to my Honda as she rolled down her window. Jennifer Liu killed herself last week, she said without preamble. The words hit like ice water. Jennifer, the former marketing director who'd been pushed out before me. The obituary said sudden illness, but I know her sister. Pills. Left a note about losing everything she'd worked for. About being blacklisted. Sarah's knuckles were white on her steering wheel. Richard didn't just take her job. He made sure she couldn't get another one. Bad references, whisper campaigns. She was radioactive. Jesus. That could be us. Amanda. That could be you. It won't be. How can you be sure? I looked at her for a long moment, calculating. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her a single document, one page of what I'd found. Her eyes widened. Is this fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy? Take your pick. You need to take this to the board. The board that promoted him? The board that's been approving these expenses? I shook my head. They're either complicit or incompetent. Either way, they won't listen to a demoted director with an axe to grind. Then what? I need more. I need everything. And I need it to be undeniable. Sarah was quiet for a moment. There are others. Other directors and VPs he's pushed out. Some might talk. I need more than talk. I need evidence, documents, recordings. That's dangerous territory. So is doing nothing. She nodded slowly. Michael Torres from Operations, Lisa Park from Legal. Both pushed out last year. Both had similar experiences. Lisa especially, she was investigating some irregularities before her sudden restructuring. Can you connect us? Carefully. Richard has eyes everywhere. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my network in secret. Coffee meetings in obscure cafes, encrypted messages, late-night phone calls from burner phones. Each person had a piece of the puzzle. Michael had noticed inflated contractor rates. Lisa had questioned suspicious acquisition terms before being silenced. Together, we were mapping a conspiracy that went beyond simple embezzlement. Richard was preparing Harbor and Vale for a hostile takeover from the inside. Weaken the company's financial position through bleeding it dry. Eliminate anyone who might object. Then sweep in with outside investors to buy it for pennies on the dollar. The Metalworks acquisition was designed to fail, creating a massive loss that would justify selling off divisions. I documented everything, every receipt, every email, every pattern. My reconciliation folder grew to gigabytes of evidence. But data was just data without the right delivery mechanism. That's when I remembered something Dennis from accounting had mentioned. The quarterly audit was coming up. External auditors from Deloitte would be crawling through our books. They were the one group Richard couldn't control or intimidate. But I needed a way to get the information to them without it being traced back to me. Richard had already destroyed Jennifer Liu. I wouldn't be next. Late one night, I studied the audit schedule Kevin had carelessly left on the shared drive. The auditors would be focusing on the divisions Richard controlled directly. They'd miss Constellation Consulting unless someone pointed them in the right direction. I began preparing a package. Not just the fraud, that was obvious once you looked, but the entire network. The pattern of eliminated executives, the suspicious timing of departures and deals, the systematic destruction of anyone who stood in Richard's way. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, though the thought of Richard in handcuffs did warm the cold space where my career used to be. This was about Jennifer Liu, about Sarah Martinez, about every competent executive whose life Richard had destroyed to build his empire of corruption. The 37th floor had become my war room, and Richard Holloway had no idea that the woman he'd tried to bury was about to bring his entire kingdom crashing down. The spark of revenge had grown into a controlled burn, and I was ready to watch his world turn to ash. The law offices of Brennan, Ross & Associates occupied a modest suite in the West Loop, far from the glass and chrome towers of downtown. I sat across from Evelyn Ross, a 31-year-old attorney with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for taking on cases other firms wouldn't touch. Sarah Martinez said you might need legal counsel, she said, reviewing the single page I'd allowed her to see. This is explosive. That's one page of approximately 300. Her eyebrows raised. You've been busy. I've had a lot of time on my hands since being demoted to data entry. Sarah mentioned Richard Holloway. I've heard that name before. She pulled out a tablet, scrolling through files. 3 wrongful termination inquiries in the past year. All former Harbor and Vale executives. None proceeded to lawsuit. Settlements or intimidation. NDAs are powerful weapons. She studied me. You haven't signed anything? They didn't think they needed me to. The humiliation was supposed to be enough. Their mistake. She leaned back. What exactly are you looking for, Ms. Carter? Justice and protection while I pursue it. Justice is expensive and dangerous when you're taking on someone with Richard Holloway's resources. He's stealing from the company. That's not just a civil matter. It's criminal, FBI territory if we can prove interstate commerce involvement. She made notes. But whistleblower cases are complex. You need bulletproof evidence and protective documentation before you make any moves. What about the others? The executives he's pushed out? Potential class action for hostile work environment, but that's separate from the fraud. She tapped her pen. How many others know what you've found? 4, maybe 5 former employees, all terrified of retaliation. Smart. Richard's already shown he's willing to destroy lives. She pulled out a business card. My partner, James Brennan. James Brennan is Harbor and Vale's general counsel. Different James Brennan. Mine is his younger brother. Left corporate law after watching too many companies protect predators. A ghost of a smile. He has a particular interest in taking down corrupt executives who think they're untouchable. Over the next week, I met with both Ross and Brennan, the good Brennan, in a series of clandestine meetings. They introduced me to 2 more former Harbor and Vale employees who'd been collecting evidence. Tom Walsh, former CFO, who'd been forced into early retirement when he questioned accounting irregularities. Diana Singh, former head of procurement, who'd noticed the Constellation Consulting invoices months before I had. We've all been building cases in isolation, Tom said during a meeting in Evelyn's conference room. Amanda's connected the dots we couldn't see individually. The question is timing, Diana added. The quarterly audit starts in 2 weeks. That's our window. It's also when Richard will be most paranoid, Brennan pointed out. Any unusual activity will be noticed. Not if it comes from multiple directions, I said. We don't send one package. We send 5. Different aspects of the fraud from different sources. Make it impossible to suppress. That's conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, Evelyn said carefully. If this goes wrong. Jennifer Liu is dead, I interrupted. How much more wrong can it go? The room fell silent. Everyone knew the stakes. There's another issue, Tom said finally. The board. At least 2 members have to be aware of what Richard's doing. Harrison Blackstone and Patricia Vance both signed off on the Constellation contracts. Then they go down too, I said. That's a dangerous game. Blackstone has connections in every major firm in Chicago. You'll never work in this city again. I'm already professionally dead. Richard made sure of that. I looked around the room. We all are. The only question is whether we die quietly or take them with us. Diana laughed, bitter and sharp. When you put it that way, we spent the next 3 days building our strategy. Evelyn would file whistleblower protection documents for all of us, sealed but ready. Tom would prepare a forensic accounting report that even the most corrupt board member couldn't ignore. Diana had contacts at the SEC who'd been sniffing around Harbor and Vale's acquisition patterns, and I would do what I did best, work from the inside. You're still employed there, Brennan noted. That gives you access we don't have. Barely employed, I'm a ghost on the 37th floor. Ghosts can go places the living can't, Evelyn said. Richard doesn't see you as a threat anymore. That's your advantage. She was right. In Richard's mind, I was already gone. Just too pathetic to realize it. He passed me in the hallway the next day without a glance, discussing the Metalworks acquisition with Marcus Webb. They were both laughing about something, probably another career they'd just destroyed. That night, I accessed Richard's calendar through the system. He'd be in New York the first day of the audit. Marcus would be at a conference in Miami. The Wolves would be away while the auditors descended. I messaged the group, "Game on." Evelyn responded immediately. "Whistleblower protections filed. You're all covered legally as of 3:47 p.m. today." Tom. SEC contact confirmed receipt of preliminary concerns. Diana. Deloitte team lead is Rebecca Chen. She's clean. Worked with her 5 years ago. Sarah. I've got 3 more former employees ready to talk if needed. I stared at my screen, at the mountain of evidence I'd compiled, at the network of broken careers that had united for this moment. Richard Holloway thought he'd crushed us all. Instead, he'd created an army of the professionally wounded, all with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The alliance was formed. The weapons were loaded. And Richard Holloway was about to learn that the most dangerous enemy is the one you've already dismissed as defeated. The week before the audit, I perfected my performance as the broken executive. I arrived early, left late, and completed every mundane task Kevin threw at me with mechanical precision. When Richard passed me in the elevator, I kept my eyes down, shoulders slumped, the picture of professional defeat. Pathetic, I heard him mutter to Marcus Webb as the doors closed. Perfect. Let them think I was pathetic. Sun Tzu wrote about appearing weak when you are strong. Richard had probably read The Art of War in business school, but he'd never truly understood it. Meanwhile, my real work happened in the margins. During lunch breaks, I photographed documents in the empty 42nd floor conference rooms. After hours, I forwarded emails to my encrypted external account, careful to use the company's own VPN to mask my digital footprints. Every crime Richard had committed was being meticulously cataloged. 3 days before the audit, Kevin made a mistake that would prove fatal to Richard's empire. "Amanda, I need you to prepare the Constellation Consulting documentation for the auditors," he said, dropping a folder on my desk. "Just organize the invoices and contracts. Nothing complex." I almost laughed. Richard's puppet was handing me the very rope that would hang them. "Of course," I replied, maintaining my defeated monotone. "When do you need it?" "End of week. The auditors want to review all vendor contracts over $1 million. That night, I worked until 3 a.m., but I wasn't just organizing, I was creating a parallel file. For every legitimate-looking invoice in the official folder, I documented the corresponding lack of deliverables. For every contract, I highlighted the connection to Richard's network. 2 versions of the truth. One Richard expected the auditors to see, and one they would actually receive. The beauty was in the subtlety. I didn't need to send the auditors an obvious smoking gun. I just needed to raise enough questions that they'd dig deeper. And when they dug, they'd find the graveyard of evidence we'd prepared. Thursday arrived with Richard safely in New York, confident his kingdom was secure. I submitted the official Constellation folder to Kevin, who barely glanced at it before forwarding it to the audit team. Then I did something Richard never expected from broken Amanda Carter. I walked up to the 45th floor where the auditors had set up their temporary office. "Excuse me," I said to Rebecca Martinez, the lead auditor Diana had identified as clean. "I'm Amanda Carter from Operations. There seems to be a version control issue with some of the documents Mr. Marsh submitted." She looked up, irritated at the interruption. "Version control?" "Yes, the Constellation Consulting file. I believe he may have sent you last quarter's documentation by mistake. I have the current versions here." I handed her a USB drive. "I wanted to ensure you had the most accurate information." "Thank you, Ms. Carter. We'll review both versions." "Of course. Also," I hesitated, playing the nervous employee perfectly. "Some of the supporting documentation might be in non-standard folders in our system. If you need help locating anything, I'm on 37. She nodded, already turning back to her screen. But I saw her insert the USB drive as I left. By Friday afternoon, the audit team had started asking questions. Uncomfortable questions. Kevin was panicking, calling Richard in New York every hour. They want to see the constellation deliverables, I heard him say, pacing past my desk. All of them. What do I tell them? I couldn't hear Richard's response, but Kevin's face went pale. That evening, as I was supposedly finishing my data entry, Diana Singh executed her part of the plan. She'd scheduled a concerned citizen meeting with the SEC, providing just enough information to trigger a preliminary investigation. Tom Walsh had simultaneously reached out to 3 major shareholders with evidence of financial irregularities. Sarah Martinez had ensured that a reporter from the Tribune received an anonymous tip about executive exodus at Harbor and Vale. We weren't just attacking from one angle. We were creating a perfect storm. Saturday morning, my phone rang. Kevin, panicking. Amanda, I need you in the office, now. It's Saturday. The auditors are here. They have questions about the files you gave them. Richard wants you to explain that it was a mistake. A mistake. They wanted me to fall on my sword to protect them. I'll be right there, I said. I arrived to find chaos on the 45th floor. Auditors huddled in groups, laptops open, printing documents. Kevin intercepted me, grabbing my arm. Tell them you made an error. Tell them you mixed up the files. But I didn't mix up anything. His grip tightened. Amanda, you're already on thin ice. Don't make this worse for yourself. Worse? I pulled my arm free. How could it possibly get worse, Kevin? You took my job, my team, my projects. What else is there to take? You have no idea what Richard is capable of. Actually, I said, loud enough for the nearest auditor to hear. I know exactly what Richard is capable of. That's why I made sure you had the correct documentation. Kevin's face went from pale to ashen. You stupid. Ms. Carter? Rebecca Martinez appeared beside us. We'd like to ask you some questions about these vendor contracts. Privately. I smiled at Kevin, the first genuine smile I'd worn in months. Of course, I'd be happy to help. As I followed Rebecca to a conference room, I passed a window overlooking the Chicago River. The city sprawled below, indifferent to the small war being waged in this tower. But wars aren't always won with armies and explosions. Sometimes they're won with spreadsheets and USB drives, with careful planning and perfect timing. Richard Holloway was still in New York, probably in some expensive restaurant, confident his kingdom was secure. He had no idea that his most pathetic victim had just lit the fuse that would destroy everything he'd built on the bones of our careers. The game of appearances was over. The real game was about to begin. Monday morning arrived like a thunderclap. Richard had cut his New York trip short, arriving at Harbor and Vale at 6 a.m. By 7 a.m., the 42nd floor was in full crisis mode. I watched from my desk on 37 as executives scurried between offices, their faces drawn with panic. The Tribune article had dropped Sunday night. Exodus at Harbor and Vale. 5 directors departed under mysterious circumstances. Sarah Martinez had ensured the reporter had just enough information to raise questions without making direct accusations. Yet, at 9 a.m., an emergency all-hands meeting was called. The main auditorium filled with confused employees as Richard took the stage, his usual swagger replaced with barely controlled rage. There have been some misleading reports about our company, he began, gripping the podium. Let me be clear, Harbor and Vale is stronger than ever. The recent restructuring was necessary for growth. Someone in the crowd raised their hand. What about the SEC investigation? Richard's jaw tightened. There is no investigation. It's a preliminary inquiry based on false information provided by disgruntled former employees. That's when I stood up. 500 heads turned as I walked toward the microphone in the aisle. Are you also going to deny the $3 million paid to Constellation Consulting? My voice echoed through the auditorium. A company that's never delivered a single report? Ms. Carter, you're confused. Perhaps the stress of your new position? My new position gave me access to every expense report, Richard, every invoice, every contract you thought was buried in the data. Security started moving toward me, but Rebecca Martinez and her audit team entered through the side doors. The FBI badges they carried stopped everyone cold. "Mr. Holloway," Rebecca announced, though she wasn't actually Rebecca Martinez, the auditor. She was Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Diana's intel had been partially right. Rebecca was clean because she wasn't just an auditor. "We need you to come with us. We have warrants for your office, your computers, and your records." The auditorium erupted. Richard's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally, cold calculation as his eyes found me. "You." He breathed into the microphone. "Me," I confirmed. "The pathetic, broken executive you left on 37 to die professionally. Except you made one mistake. Richard. You gave me access to everything. You were so confident I was destroyed that you handed me the very weapons I needed." Marcus Webb tried to flee but was intercepted by another agent, Harrison Blackstone and Patricia Vance. The board members Tom had identified as complicit were escorted from their seats. "You've destroyed yourself," Richard snarled as an agent approached him. "You'll never work again. I'll make sure." "Like you made sure Jennifer Liu would never work again?" I interrupted. "She's dead." "Richard. She killed herself because you didn't just take her job. You destroyed her entire future. But Jennifer kept records too. Her sister provided them to the FBI yesterday." The blood drained from his face. He hadn't known about Jennifer's documentation. Agent Martinez placed handcuffs on Richard's wrists. "Mr. Holloway, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." As they led him out, Richard turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Carter." "You're right," I replied. "It's just beginning. The forensic accountants are going through 10 years of records. Every deal you've touched, every person you've destroyed, every dollar you've stolen, it's all coming to light." The auditorium remained frozen as the FBI team systematically removed evidence and executives. Kevin Marsh sat in the front row, his face white with terror, realizing he'd been nothing but a pawn in Richard's game, and that pawns are always sacrificed. That afternoon, an emergency board meeting was convened. The remaining board members, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, needed leadership to navigate the crisis. Tom Walsh, my ally and former CFO, had already been in contact with them, presenting a recovery plan that would stabilize the company. But they needed more than a CFO. They needed someone who understood the corruption deeply enough to root it out completely. Someone who'd proven they could stand against Richard's machine and win. At 4 p.m., I received a call from the board chair, Elizabeth Sterling, one of the few members who'd been genuinely ignorant of Richard's schemes. "Ms. Carter, we need to discuss your future with Harbor and Vale." "I have a future here?" "We need someone to lead the internal investigation and restructuring, someone who understands the depth of the problem." She paused. "The board is prepared to offer you Executive Vice President of Compliance and Strategic Restructuring. You'd report directly to the board. EVP, not just restored to my former position, but elevated far above it." It was vindication. But it felt hollow considering the price. Jennifer Liu's life, countless destroyed careers. "I'll consider it," I said, "but I have conditions." "We're listening." "Full reinstatement and compensation for every executive Richard wrongfully terminated. A memorial fund in Jennifer Liu's name. And complete autonomy to clean house. Anyone who enabled Richard goes. That's extensive. That's justice. And it's just the beginning." As I hung up, I looked out the window of the 37th floor. My war room, my purgatory, my launching pad. Tomorrow, I'd likely be on the 45th floor, in the office Richard had once occupied. But tonight, I'd stay here a little longer, in the place where Amanda Carter had died and something stronger had been born. The news was already spreading. CNN had picked up the story. Major corporate fraud exposed by whistleblower at Chicago firm. My phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues, reporters, and headhunters. But I ignored them all except one. From Sarah Martinez. We did it, Jennifer would be proud. Yes, we did it. But as I watched the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky the color of blood and redemption, I knew this was just the first battle. Richard's network ran deep, and corruption like this didn't exist in isolation. Harbor and Vale would need to be rebuilt from the ground up. But I'd been broken down to nothing and survived. I could handle rebuilding an empire. The boardroom on the 53rd floor had never felt more electric. 2 weeks after Richard's arrest, Harbor and Vale's remaining board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces grave. I stood at the presentation screen, laser pointer steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. The corruption goes deeper than Richard Holloway, I began, clicking to the first slide. Our investigation has uncovered systematic fraud totaling $87 million over 5 years. Gasps echoed through the room. Elizabeth Sterling, the board chair, leaned forward. 87 million. Confirmed losses, the actual number may be higher. I clicked to the next slide, a web of connections that looked like a spider's masterpiece. 43 employees were involved at various levels, some knowingly, others manipulated into compliance through blackmail or threats. My God, whispered Robert Ashford, the longest-serving board member. How did we miss this? Because Richard designed it to be missed. He didn't just steal money, he built an entire shadow structure within Harbor and Vale. False departments, ghost employees, shell companies. The Metalworks acquisition was intended to be his masterpiece, a controlled demolition that would let his investor group buy our assets for pennies on the dollar. I clicked again. Photos appeared, Richard in handcuffs, Marcus Webb being escorted from his home, 3 other executives in FBI custody. The FBI has made 17 arrests so far. But that's not why you called this emergency meeting. Elizabeth Sterling stood. The board has been discussing Harbor and Vale's future. We're hemorrhaging clients. Stock price has dropped 40%. There's talk of hostile takeover attempts from 3 competitors. You need new leadership, I said simply. We need more than that. We need resurrection. She looked around the table, then back at me. Ms. Carter, the board has made a decision. We're not offering you EVP of compliance. My stomach dropped. After everything, we're offering you CEO. The room went silent. I felt the floor shift beneath me, though I knew it was just my world reorienting itself. I'm 34 years old, I managed. I was a director 2 months ago. Now you want me to run a $300 million company that's on the brink of collapse? You're the only one who understands the disease and the cure, Robert Ashford said. You've proven you can fight. Now we need you to rebuild. The shareholders have already been briefed. You exposing Richard saved them from total loss. They're willing to bet on the person who prevented catastrophe. I turned to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago stretched below, indifferent and eternal. 3 months ago, I'd sat in a conference room 20 floors below, being told I was redundant. Now they were offering me the kingdom. I'll need complete autonomy, I said, still facing the city. No interference, no sacred cows. Anyone who enabled Richard's culture of fear goes. Agreed. I want Tom Walsh as CFO, Diana Singh as Chief Compliance Officer, Sarah Martinez as Head of Human Resources. You want to build your leadership team from Richard's victims? I turned back to face them. I want to build it from people who've proven they'll stand up to corruption, even when it costs them everything. They've been tested in ways your typical executives never are. The board exchanged glances. Elizabeth nodded. Done. And I want Evelyn Ross on retainer as Chief Legal Counsel. The Brennan currently in that position needs to go. He's been here 15 years. And he signed off on every suspicious contract Richard presented. Incompetence or complicity. Either way, he's out. More uncomfortable shifting. But they'd created this situation through their negligence. They didn't get to be comfortable now. There's one more thing, I said. Kevin Marsh and every other junior executive who participated in humiliating former directors, they're gone, not demoted. Gone. with their participation noted in their reference checks? That seems vindictive. It's justice. They chose to be instruments of psychological torture. There are consequences. Elizabeth Sterling stood. All right, Miss Carter. The board accepts your terms. Welcome to the CEO suite. The vote was unanimous. Though I saw reluctance in some faces, they were desperate, and I was their lifeline. But I wasn't doing this for them. That afternoon, I stood in what had been Richard's office, now mine. The furniture was gone, removed as evidence. The walls were bare where his vanity photographs had hung. It was a blank slate, which felt appropriate. Kevin Marsh was escorted out by security at 3 p.m., his box of belongings clutched to his chest. He saw me watching from the window, and our eyes met. The confusion and fear in his face might have sparked pity once. Now I felt nothing. He'd made his choices. At 4 p.m., I called an all-hands meeting, the same auditorium where Richard had been arrested. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Harbor and Vale has been sick, I began. No podium, no notes, just me standing before 500 employees. Not just with corruption, but with fear. Fear of speaking up. Fear of questioning authority. Fear of being the next one pushed out. Heads nodded throughout the crowd. That ends today. We're implementing anonymous reporting systems, whistleblower protections that actually protect, and anyone who retaliates against an employee for raising concerns will be terminated immediately. What about our jobs? Someone called out. Are there more layoffs coming? The only people losing their jobs are those who participated in Richard's schemes. If you did your work honestly, you're safe. More than safe, you're essential to our rebuilding. I looked across the sea of faces, scared, hopeful, skeptical. Jennifer Liu is dead because this company failed to protect its people. That's our shame to carry. But we honor her memory by ensuring it never happens again. Harbor and Vale will be a place where talent rises on merit, where questions are welcomed, where no one person can build a shadow empire. The applause started slowly, then built to thunder. Not everyone was clapping. I marked the faces that remained cold. More work to do there. That evening, as my first day as CEO ended, I stood in my empty office watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. The janitor knocked, entered with his cart. Working late already? He asked with a slight smile. Just like when you were on 37. I recognized him then, Carlos, who'd watched me work those late nights in exile, who'd sometimes left an extra coffee on my desk without a word. You knew? I asked. I've been here 20 years. I see everything. The powerful think we're invisible. He emptied my trash bin. Mr. Holloway never learned our names. You always said good morning, even after your demotion. It's just basic decency. No, he said, heading for the door. It's leadership, the real kind. Alone again, I opened my laptop. There was so much work ahead, forensic audits to complete, structures to rebuild, trust to earn. But for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or determination. I felt hope. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, I'd won. Not just for me, but for Jennifer Liu, for Sarah Martinez, for Tom Walsh, for Diana Singh. For everyone Richard Holloway had tried to break. The board had given me a broken empire to run. Perfect. I'd been broken too. And look where that had led. Time to rise. 6 months later, I stood before a packed conference hall at the Chicago Economic Forum. 300 of the city's most powerful executives, investors, and journalists had come to hear the resurrection story of Harbor and Vale Industries. When I became CEO, I began, the spotlight warm on my face. Harbor and Vale was valued at $180 million. We'd lost 40% of our value in scandal. Today, we're valued at $320 million. The applause was professional, measured. These weren't employees. These were sharks who'd circled our bleeding company, waiting to feed. Instead, they'd watched us transform into something stronger. The conventional wisdom was to sell off divisions, cut costs, shrink to survive. We did the opposite. We invested in our people, we promoted from within, We turned whistleblowers into leaders. And we grew. I clicked to show our latest quarterly results. Revenue up 37%, client retention at 94%. Employee satisfaction, something Richard had never even measured, at an all-time high. Ms. Carter, a reporter called out during Q&A. Richard Holloway's trial starts next month. Will you be testifying? Absolutely. Richard Holloway and his network stole more than money. They stole careers, dignity, and in one tragic case, a life. I'll testify to ensure justice is complete. There are rumors of a Hollywood studio interested in your story, another journalist said. The secretary who brought down a corrupt empire. I was never a secretary, I corrected, my voice steel wrapped in silk. I was a director who was demoted to analyst as part of a systematic abuse of power. And I didn't bring down anything alone. This was a collective effort by brave individuals who risked everything for truth. After the forum, I returned to Harbor & Vale's headquarters. The 42nd floor buzzed with healthy energy now. Tom Walsh had transformed our financial operations. Diana Singh had built a compliance system that was becoming an industry model. Sarah Martinez had revolutionized our HR, creating support systems for employees that other companies were now copying. I passed the 37th floor on my way up. We'd transformed it too. No longer corporate purgatory, but our innovation lab, where junior employees could pitch ideas directly to leadership. The desk where I'd plotted Richard's downfall now belonged to a bright young analyst named Marcus, different Marcus, who'd just identified a market opportunity worth $50 million. In my office, fully furnished now with clean lines and warm colors, I found a package on my desk. No return address. Inside, a simple card. Thank you for giving my sister justice. Lou family. I stood at the window, card in hand, watching the Chicago River wind through the city. The sun was setting, painting the glass towers gold and amber. 6 months ago, I'd stood in a similar position, demoted and humiliated, believing my career was over. Richard Holloway had thought he was untouchable. He'd built an empire on fear, intimidation, and the broken careers of anyone who challenged him. He'd counted on our silence, our shame, our isolation. He'd never considered that the people he'd tried to destroy might find each other, that we might transform our pain into power, our humiliation into determination, that the very skills he'd dismissed in us, my attention to detail, Tom's financial acumen, Diana's pattern recognition, Sarah's networking, would be the weapons that brought him down. Tomorrow, Harbor & Vale would announce our largest acquisition yet, Metalworks Industries, the same company Richard had tried to use for his scheme. We were buying legitimately, for a fair price, to create real value. The irony was delicious. But tonight, I had one last task. I walked to the elevator, pressing the button for the 37th floor. The innovation lab was empty except for one person, Evelyn Ross, now our chief legal counsel, working late on compliance frameworks. You know, she said, looking up from her laptop. Most CEOs don't visit the 37th floor at 9 p.m. Most CEOs didn't rise from the 37th floor, I replied, sitting on the edge of what had been my desk of exile. I come here to remember. Remember what? That power isn't about the floor you're on, or the title on your door. It's about what you do when you've lost everything. It's about who stands with you in the darkness. It's about transforming destruction into construction. She smiled. Very philosophical for a Tuesday night. Richard's going to prison. Evelyn, 25 to life if the FBI gets what they're asking for. But that's not the real victory. No. The real victory is this. I gestured around the floor, up toward the ceiling, encompassing the entire building. We didn't just survive what he did to us. We used it to become stronger. Every person he tried to destroy is now in a position of power, running the empire he thought was his. I stood, straightening my jacket, not the same brand I'd worn as a director, but something better. Something earned through fire. Amanda, Evelyn called as I headed for the elevator. What would you have done if Richard hadn't given you access to those files? If he'd been smarter about his cruelty? I turned back, considering. He couldn't have been smarter about it. Cruelty and intelligence are incompatible in the long run. Cruelty requires underestimating your victims. And underestimating people like us, people with nothing left to lose, that was his fatal mistake. The elevator arrived with its soft chime. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. 34 years old, CEO of a $300 million company, built on the ashes of corruption, risen from the depths of professional humiliation. Richard Holloway had tried to destroy Amanda Carter. Instead, he'd created something he never could have imagined. A leader forged in the fires of injustice, tempered by strategic revenge and polished by ultimate triumph. The empire was mine now, not stolen, not corrupted, but earned through the kind of battle most executives never face. And from the CEO suite of Harbor and Vale Industries, I'd make sure no Richard Holloway ever rose again. The 37th floor had been my purgatory. The 53rd floor was my throne. But the real power, that lived in the space between, in the journey from humiliation to vindication, from victim to victor, from the ashes of a career destroyed to the pinnacle of corporate power, $300 million, hundreds of employees, a legacy of justice. Not bad for someone they'd called redundant. Not bad at all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and ultimate triumph. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If Amanda's journey from humiliation to CEO inspired you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in her position? Let me know in the comments.